Hi everyone, this is James from TeaDB filming a T Basics episode on how to use a Gaiwan. So we actually filmed an episode on Gaiwans a long ways back, episode 41. Please watch that. It's one of our most watched episodes, I think, for a pretty good reason. It's kind of a general overview, and I wanted to just not duplicate that episode, but sort of supplement it. This episode will also specifically focus on brewing it and usage. So a Gaiwan is highly likely to be one of the first things you'll buy if you are interested in diving a little deeper into the world of Gong Fu brewing and want to sort of try brewing like we do on the show. In general, while there are some exceptions, there's a pretty low barrier to entry for Gaiwans than, say, something like a clay teapot. I tend to think of Gaiwans as an all-purpose, neutral brewing device. Most Gaiwans are made out of porcelain and are neutral material. They aren't porous like Yixing or Jianshui teapots, so you don't need to worry about seasoning or anything like that. You can just use the same Gaiwan for just about every type of tea. And while there are certainly some nuances towards pairing Gaiwans or the shape of a Gaiwan with a certain tea, I think for the most part you don't need to worry about it, especially if we're approaching this as sort of a really basic level. Sure, at the margins there might be some differences, but I don't think you really need to concern yourself with that if you are just starting out, especially. So a big reason that Gaiwans are popular is the low barrier to entry, and a main reason for that is that they are much less expensive. So you can, of course, buy an antique, an expensive one, a decorative one, an artisan one, but they're very easy to find for around $10 and quite possible to buy from a place like Yunnan Sourcing for $5 or $6. So they're really inexpensive. Even the really inexpensive ones are usually perfectly functional. Some of my most used ones were picked up for only $5 locally, so I didn't even have to pay for shipping. So you can definitely buy a nicer, more expensive one if you like, but it isn't required. It isn't necessary if your goal is simply to make a decent tea. So if you've just bought a Gaiwan and are trying to brew for the first time, you'll want to practice. So to practice without burning yourself, I'd recommend trying it with just room temperature water. So just fill your kettle, perhaps with room temperature water, and try pouring with it several times. Then you can maybe try it with heated water. If you have a variable temperature kettle, you can try it at 175, so the amount of risk is lower. Two ways of pouring I'm going to talk about. Basically, when you're brewing with a Gaiwan, you're going to use the lid to strain the leaves so they don't end up in your chahai or cup or wherever you're pouring. So ideally, you want to do this all without burning yourself or any physical harm. So the first way is the way that I brew with the Gaiwan. It's my preferred method. You will use the first 3 fingers of your hand to grip the Gaiwan. The thumb should be on one of the edges, this index finger at the top of the lid that holds it back, and the middle finger on the other side, like this. And the second way, for which I personally don't use at all, is to use the much neglected Gaiwan saucer to sort of lift the Gaiwan and strain it into the cup. I think part of the reason is my hands aren't huge, and I feel like this really stretches out my hands. But if you try that method, I know Glenn has a video where he shows that method, and it works for you, by all means do it. So a couple basic tips. Go slowly, especially at first. One of the advantages of a Gaiwan versus a pot is you have a lot of control over the flow in the stream of it, whereas when you're brewing with a pot, everything needs to travel through this little spout. So by pouring slowly, especially when you're just starting out, you're ensuring that it won't burn you by coming out of the Gaiwan too fast in a part that is closer to your fingers. Once you get more comfortable, you'll feel more at ease going faster, but there's really no need to rush it when you are just starting out. Second tip is to don't fill it up too much. So just sort of like if you have a pot that is filled to the brim on the stove, you're more likely to have accidents, it to spill over, etc., than if you have a pot that's half filled. So if you fill it up too highly, you're much more likely to get burnt or have it spill over. Worse, if you fill a Gaiwan all the way to the very top of the place where you're supposed to put your fingers, so if you fill this all the way to the brim, it becomes extremely difficult to handle. So my advice is to start by being more conservative in how you fill up the Gaiwan, and as you get more comfortable, you can slowly fill it up more. I don't think you ever really want to be filling it up all the way to the very tip-top brim, but you do want to fill it up most of the way. But to start out, I'd say if you want to fill up your Gaiwan to 75 to 80% of the capacity to start to reduce the risk, I think that's fine. And then you can slowly level your way up. Okay, 3. This is probably the most important, but make sure you are getting a really good grip on the edges of the Gaiwan. The edges are very important. A big key for me finding a Gaiwan that handles well for myself is if I can get a really solid grip around the edges with my thumb and middle finger. If either of those fingers slip, you're going to risk a broken Gaiwan, ruined tea, and potentially burnt fingers. So if you grip too low on the Gaiwan, you will get closer to a spot where it is hot and risk burning yourselves as well. So you really want to make sure you can grip very firmly around the edges. As well as if you grip too far forward, you're going to be putting your fingers at risk by moving them closer to the water stream. So if your grip isn't good enough, one crutch that you'll have is that the fourth finger will move into place, and usually the fourth finger can often move to a place that's a little closer to the hot spot, so it's also an easy way to get at least a little bit burned. So the 3 steps: 1, go slowly; 2, don't fill it up too much; and 3, get a good grip on the edges with 3 fingers. These 3. That's pretty much it. Gaiwans are easy to handle once you get the hang of it, and while just about everyone will burn themselves in the finger, I still occasionally burn myself. Once you break in your mom hands, a Gaiwan should really be no problem at all. Running through last few topics, Gaiwan literally means lidded cup in Chinese, and while it is more often used for brewing tea, if you see a old Chinese movie or a Chinese movie set in the past, you can see people drinking from Gaiwan, so it's not like that is the craziest thing to do, although I think in our scene, the Western tea scene, you'll definitely see it more used as a brewing device. And the size can play a pretty important role in how comfortable you are handling a Gaiwan. For me, myself, I'm not very comfortable at handling Gaiwans above 150 milliliters. When I use a larger Gaiwan, I tend to not be as comfortable stretching my hands into position, and I need to compensate by pouring very slowly. Another option worth mentioning are easy Gaiwans. If you're not sure what those are, you can look them up on Yunnan Sourcing. They're basically Gaiwans designed to be easy to handle and have less risk of burning. If you've watched this episode and have some hesitancy due to the burning factor, these could offer the same versatility and look of a Chinese brewing device without too much of the downside. Gaiwans also have the advantage of giving really easy access to smell the leaves, and if you have a white one, you can see the color of the liqueur and the leaves. So, really easy to just smell from here, smell from the lid as well. So, overall, Gaiwans are great. They're inexpensive, they're versatile, they're neutral, and they're probably some of the most commonly used and highly functional devices. So, give them a shot if you haven't already. Let me know how you like this episode. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.